entire division.
She really does.
Jessica Havok. I mean, Don, she looks like a villain from a movie. Like, this is a real human being in the ring right now, just ripping apart. Oh!
She is a monster, and I mean, I don't use that word lightly.
Good night. Jessica Havok secures the win.
Stitching on the machine is done using the inside edge of the presser foot as a guide.
Hello, my glamorous gargoyles. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about this set of gear that I made for Jessica Havok to wear at Slammiversary 2019. This is, I believe, the 8th set of gear I have made Havok. We started working together in 2015 when she came to me with the dream of one day owning a corset she could wrestle in. I have since made her several corsets to wrestle in, as well as many other garments, including the bodysuit you're going to see me make today. Now, into the thread mines! After a design is agreed upon, the first step is to make a pattern for the garment. This involves a lot of math that uses the comprehensive set of measurements I require each of my clients to provide. I was always that kid who would get in trouble for not showing her work in class, so I apologize for not showing the process here. What I'm left with is the garment pattern that I use to inform how I design the applique. After all the base pieces and applique are cut, they are flat-lined with a thin spandex or mesh and basted with spray adhesive. This is to add strength and reduce stress on the fashion layer, whose surface naturally erodes over time. In the case of the collar, it's there to add a bit of structure. One of the most underappreciated and complicated parts of gear making is deciding the order of operations. Since I work from scratch, there's no directions on how to assemble the garments. As I cut and line the pieces, I'm thinking about how I will sew them together to make it easiest on my body, as well as what will give the garment the most durability. It might seem like I'm working backwards sometimes, but there's a reason for things, I promise. Since mesh is so fiddly and flexible, tracing around the piece before spray gluing it is very important. It helps to not waste glue by overspraying the fabric, but it also helps keep its shape. The mesh warps naturally as I handle it either way, so I make sure the pieces are accurate to the pattern by removing any excess with a rotary blade. The next step is to glue any applique to our base pieces. This back panel has a sprawling applique of Havok's name, so it takes some time to place it accurately. Once I'm satisfied with the placement, I use wet glue to adhere it to the mesh. The reason I'm not using spray glue here is because the mesh is very slippery and too textured to adhere properly. Wet glue is more permanent as well and takes stress off the thread that will eventually hold the applique to the base, which is especially important when you're working with mesh. After waiting 20 minutes and applying several hearty sprays of dry-type silicone, it's time to sew down our applique. This is the most time-consuming aspect of the gear-making process, making sure every little section of applique is properly secured with a zigzag stitch. It involves a lot of backstitching and lifting the presser foot and adjusting the presser foot pressure and moving the project around and just being generally tedious. Fortunately for you, you are witnessing only the highlights at 8 times speed. Here, I'm snipping out a guide so I have the exact middle as an anchor for when I pin this panel to the bottom of the panel that I just finished appliquing, to be sewn and top stitched later down the line. Next, we tackle the front panel and its D-ring lacing. First, I mark out where the D-rings will go with chalk, using my pattern as a reference. I go over the attachment points with a Sharpie on the pattern so I can see them through the paper when I mark the opposite panel. To make the straps that will hold the D-rings, I use a rotary cutter and a self-healing mat to cut out strips of black 4-way stretch patent vinyl. This is the same vinyl that was used for the applique. After a quick check to make sure my D-rings will fit, I spray the strips with adhesive and fold them in to form my strap. Once they are secure, they get covered in silicone spray and sent off to the zigzag machine. After being sewn, it's back to the rotary mat to get sliced in 2.5-inch sections. These strips are then slipped through the D-rings and pinned in half. I'm pinning instead of gluing here to reduce overall bulk. In order to sew as close as possible to the actual D-ring, I'm replacing the Teflon foot on my straight stitch machine with a zipper foot. A zipper foot only has metal on one side of the needle, meaning it can really snuggle up to whatever I want to sew. In this case, it's 10 little D-ring straps. I then put the Teflon foot back on my machine to stitch along the bottom of the straps as well. My pattern originally only had 8 straps on it, but I realized I wanted 10, so I added a 5th attachment point to each side of the front panel. I found that things looking right is always more important than an exact measurement, so I'm using the pre-existing markings that I perceive as even on the panel to correct the amount of space between the attachment points. Since I've been making all these markings on the lining and not the fashion layer, I insert pins on the markings so I can see them on the front, where I mark them again with chalk. Here I'm laying out the D-rings to see how they look before I glue them down with wet glue. Since this glue is fairly liquid, I place glue on each strap and let it sit for a minute before I flip it over to permanently attach it. As I wait for that to dry, I start to work on the collar. First, I sew the middle seam of each piece. Then, I lay them flat and pin open the seam to make it easier to top stitch. Silicone spray helps too. After pinning them fashion sides together, I sew along 3 sides of the collar, leaving the edge that will be attached to the bodysuit unsewn. I clip the corners and then turn the collar right side out, pinning along the turned seam to ensure a crisp edge for top stitching. Then I use a straight stitch to top stitch the collar. After top stitching, I pin the raw edge, starting at the middle seam and working outwards, and then stitch that together as well. I then trim the edge, just for neatness sake. Now that the straps are dry, it's time to sew them down, also on the straight stitch machine. I then trim the edge to reduce bulk in the seams. Now I attach the front panels to the back panels at the shoulders, using a zigzag stitch. Then I fold the seams to one side and top stitch them down, also with a zigzag stitch. I then sandwich the collar between a long piece of plain spandex bias tape and the partially assembled torso of the bodysuit, pinned it all together, and sent it through the machine. I fold the bias tape over to cover the seam and then stitch it down, trimming away any excess. This is then folded over again and pinned to form the front neckline and reinforce the standing collar. Again, we top stitch on the zigzag machine. We use a zigzag stitch to maintain stretch along the seam. Now the front panels are attached with 2 lines of straight stitching. We're using a straight seam here because this seam is going to be folded open like the collar. We do 2 lines of stitching for extra security, as a straight seam is more likely to snap. The seam is then folded open and pinned so I can apply of wet glue more easily. Then I lay down a length of heavy-duty plushback elastic to provide even more reinforcement. It's definitely going to take a beating, so it needs the help. The side panels are quickly lined, then they get pinned to the front panel and stitched with a zigzag stitch, then they get sent through the serger. This is a vertical seam, a load-bearing seam if you will, so it needs extra strength. The seams are also folded over and top stitched for strength and style. Once the glue has dried, the front seam is top stitched with a single zigzag stitch running right down the center, and the elastic is trimmed to length. Now that the center front is mostly complete, I can add the front crotch, which is made out of a stretchier spandex for comfort. I mean, who wants a pleather wedgie? It's sewn down with a zigzag, folded over, and top stitched with a zigzag for security. With the front panel fully constructed, it's time to glue down the last piece of black vinyl applique. Since this surface is entirely smooth, I can use the spray adhesive and make quick work of the gluing process. Yet again, we are back at the zigzag machine to bless the union of applique and base pattern. I didn't record the process of pinning and sewing the side seams, but it sure happened because here I am top stitching the front side seams. Wow, look at me go. After serging the bottom edge of the now assembled bodysuit, I am applying elastic to the leg holes. I don't measure the elastic, I just do this based on feel, but I do pull it more taut around the butt for a flattering fit. I then pin the crotch together and zigzag stitch it, then fold it over and top stitch. Are you sensing a pattern here? Once that's done, the leg hole elastics can be flipped and top stitched as well, which leads to finished leg holes, aka the home stretch. We are almost done, let's keep it going! As filming went on, I got lazier and lazier, so I didn't take any footage of finishing the armholes, but they were done in the same fashion as the collar you can see here. I also made an entire bra off-screen. The bodysuit and bra are both being laced up with long strips of spandex that I ran through the serger. I wanted the striking visual of the laces being thick ribbon, but also wanted something that would move with her body. You can see here that the bra was made with similar construction techniques. All seams are serged and/or top-stitched. Look at this! I am so proud of this garment that I'm showing you glamour shots of the inside. This is the reason why my work lasts for years. I take the time and effort to make sure the garments I make my clients are ready to withstand whatever comes their way.
Oh!
Oof. Even that. Thank you for joining me on my quest through the thread mines of Closet Champion. Just a heads up to those of you who enjoy my musical stylings, I have started a weekly live stream on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram every Wednesday at 9 p.m. You can enjoy a bedside concert with yours truly in my Lullaby Lounge. And if you want to learn more about gear making, make sure you check out my Patreon at katenix.com/join, where I'll be hosting a monthly maker live stream where I answer all your questions about sewing and gear making. I still have no idea how to end my videos, so take it away, me from 6 months ago.
Winslow, no! Winslow! Winslow, stop it! No scratching the door!